the stakes could not be higher. Republican plans from Project 2025 and Agenda 47 to drastically alter the structure of the federal government and reshape the levers of power around a man who tried to overturn the last election and who has pledged retribution against his political enemies present a clear and present danger. And for Donald Trump, this week was a stark reminder that though he has been granted aid and reprieve again and again, he has not yet fully escaped legal accountability. Special counsel Jack Smith's latest court filing serves a dual purpose at this point in the election cycle. It signals what's at stake for Trump himself, a sign that his legal troubles are not over. And for the rest of us, it's a flashing red light, warning us of what Donald Trump and his acolytes are capable of in the face of electoral defeat. Judge Tanya Chutkan unsealed the legal filing on Wednesday, revealing the most comprehensive picture yet of Trump's desperate attempts to cling to power at all costs after he lost the last election. One of the most damning revelations is Trump's alleged response after learning that his vice president's safety was at risk at the Capitol. He said, "So what?" Jack Smith uses this incident and much of the evidence he presents to make the case that Trump was not acting in his official capacity when he schemed to overturn the election results in 2020. A president acting in his official capacity would presumably care about the safety of his vice president. But put a pin in that. We'll return to it in a moment. Less than 24 hours after the release of this damning motion, Liz Cheney, the daughter of the conservative icon Dick Cheney, joined Vice President Kamala Harris at a campaign rally in Thursday in Ripon, Wisconsin, the birthplace of the Republican Party. This unlikely duo warned of the threat Donald Trump poses to democracy should he return to power.
I know that the most conservative of conservative values is fidelity to our Constitution. I tell you, I have never voted for a Democrat, but this year I am proudly casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. What January 6th shows us is that there is not an ounce of compassion in Donald Trump. He is petty, he is vindictive, and he is cruel. And Donald Trump is not fit to lead this good and great nation.
That same day, Donald Trump was in Saginaw, Michigan, where he continued to peddle lies about the 2020 election, along with his now almost daily fear-mongering of immigrants. So what's new in Jack Smith's latest court filing? Smith's latest account of January 6 provides striking new details about Trump's state of mind in the lead-up to the Capitol riot. The effort comes after the Supreme Court's controversial and widely criticized ruling in July, which vastly expanded presidential immunity. Smith is pulling out all the stops this time to convince the courts that the case against Trump should proceed, despite the conservative-led Supreme Court's new immunity test. Jack Smith's main goal with this new motion is to show that Trump's actions, as he tried to overturn the election results, were the actions of a private person, not those of a president carrying out official duties. Importantly, Smith draws a critical distinction between whether Trump was acting as president or as a political candidate. The motion points to new testimony from a Secret Service agent who said Trump's security detail on January 6th, quote, wasn't getting information about the rally from their counterparts at the White House staff because this was not a staff-driven event. This was a campaign-driven event, end quote. The motion also highlights Trump's practice of excluding official White House advisors and relying instead on private or campaign lawyers when pressuring Pence to overturn the electoral count. According to the filing, quote, it's hard to imagine stronger evidence that conduct is private than when the president excludes his White House counsel and only wishes to have his private counsel present, end quote. The filing also presents communications showing that Trump knew he had lost the election and yet continued spreading lies about election subversion. Among the most damning evidence used to show that Trump had no intention of respecting the election outcome is a White House staffer who overheard Trump telling family members, quote, it doesn't matter if you won or lost the election. You still have to fight like hell, end quote. One of the more shocking revelations describes an incident involving a batch of votes in Detroit, Michigan that heavily favored President Joe Biden. A Trump campaign employee urged a colleague to, quote, find a reason, end quote, to dispute the legitimacy of those votes. When the colleague warned that it could trigger civil unrest, the Trump employee responded with, make them riot. Okay, let's zoom out for a second. By now, we all have fatigue from keeping up with Trump's many indictments, his many hearings, his many cases. We're fatigued from his nonstop fear-mongering and fatigued from a Republican Party hell-bent on dividing this nation. This latest unsealed motion may not register much after all we've endured over the past year, but its gravity should not be understated. This is an historic document. Jack Smith takes particular care in this latest filing to sort out official acts from unofficial acts, making a careful case that election subversion is not a core function of the executive branch or of the presidency, which is simply legal jargon for saying Trump knew he was peddling a lie and manipulating his base as pawns in a larger scheme to overturn the election results. He knew he was risking the safety of his vice president on January 6th when he tweeted that Pence lacked courage for refusing to participate in his scheme. He knew what he was doing for weeks when he egged on his supporters to gather at the Capitol, despite being told repeatedly by advisors, attorneys, and state officials that there was no proof of election fraud. Trump knew he lost. He simply didn't care. And plotting to overturn election results, according to Smith, cannot reasonably be considered an official act of the executive office. Surely that's not what the framers had in mind when they created the office of the presidency. At its core, Smith's criminal indictment seeks to demonstrate that Trump is not above the law, that no president should be, or as Smith puts it, Trump must stand trial for his private crimes as would any other citizen. This trial will likely not see the light of day if Trump is reelected, or if it reaches the same Supreme Court that gutted Smith's previous indictment. But the conduct laid out in this motion could easily be ripped from today's headlines. Smith's latest filing is not just about a specific moment in time. It's a glimpse, a warning of what's to come. Trump has shown no sign of abandoning his big lie about the 2020 election and is sowing the same chaos ahead of the upcoming election. His cavalier attitude toward our democracy, our democratic institutions, and the lives of Americans endangered by his words, including his own followers, remains essentially, so what? And that is why Jack Smith's dogged pursuit of justice against an unrepentant demagogue will go down in history as one of the greatest defenses of our democracy. But we are all part of this historic effort. And as Americans cast their votes over the next few weeks, we will all be participating in the largest and most critical effort yet to safeguard our democracy from the existential threat that is Donald Trump. For more on this, I'm joined by Jennifer Rubin, an MSNBC political analyst and opinion writer at The Washington Post. She's the host of Jen Rubin's Green Room podcast. She's the author of Resistance, How Women Saved Democracy from Donald Trump. Joining her is Matthew Seligman, a legal scholar specializing in Supreme Court litigation and election law. He's a fellow at Stanford Law School's Constitutional Law Center and the co-author of How to Steal a Presidential Election. Good morning to both of you. Thank you both for being here. Matthew, J.D. Vance has repeatedly stated that had he been vice president on January 6th, he would have intervened in the electoral count. Now, in your latest New York Times piece, you argue that Vance's insistence is basically a promise about what he might do on January 6th, 2029, if he's presiding over the count as vice president. Tell me what this says about J.D. Vance and his fitness for office in the shadow of Donald Trump and the discussion about his fitness for office.
I think it's completely disqualifying for J.D. Vance to promise to abuse the constitutional powers of the office that he's asking the American people to give him, to elect him to. He said that on January 6th of 2021, he would have taken extra constitutional steps to ensure that Donald Trump returned to the White House. Now, Donald Trump will be term limited, notwithstanding his sometimes flirtations with suggesting he'd serve a third term. That's constitutionally forbidden. So the Republican nominee in 2028 is presumptively J.D. Vance. If J.D. Vance is elected to the vice presidency this year, he will preside over the electoral count on January 6th of 2029. He is telling us today that he would abuse those powers to ensure that he ascends to the presidency from the vice presidency. There's no more blatant assault on the rule of law and democracy in America than that.
Jennifer, given these latest revelations, do you see any sense of a growing willingness among moderate Republicans to reject Donald Trump, with voices like Liz Cheney endorsing President Harris? There's just more and more of these people who are saying this is just a fitness issue, not a policy or an ideological issue.
I would hope so. I do think that the indictment and the revised indictment and the brief really put a lot of meat on the bones. We thought we had a lot of information from the January 6th, but it's as if January 6th put the skeleton and this puts the meat, the hair, the entire body on the crime. And I would hope it acts as a wake-up call. Frankly, it may be Liz Cheney that finally pushes some Republicans to say, you know what, it's not good enough to sit on the sidelines. It's not good enough to say, well, I'm not going to vote for either one of them. This guy is an existential threat to American democracy. Look what he did. Look at his behavior. And if you really care about democracy, then you only have one choice. And I thought her appearance was magnificent and compelling. And the fact that it came just a day after Jack Smith released his brief, I thought was sort of a 1-2 punch. So if Republicans want to throw the Constitution out the window, fine, then they can vote for Trump. But don't tell yourself that you love the Constitution, you love the rule of law, right, and then vote for anyone other than Kamala Harris.
Matt, the special counsel Jack Smith relies on previous cases to create a workable definition of presidential immunity because the Supreme Court didn't provide one itself. What do you think of this approach? I mean, on one level, you know, most people with a third-grade education would say what the Supreme Court did is unworkable and doesn't make sense. But Jack Smith has to work within the confines of what they did. Do you think what he's done will hold up at the Supreme Court?
Ultimately, I think it will, and that's one of the tragedies of the unfolding of this legal case. We knew from the very outset, we knew from January of 2021 that this was fundamentally a private plot by a political candidate to try to gain an office that he had no legal right to. He executed that plot through private lawyers like John Eastman and Kenneth Chesebro, not using the levers of power of government. So it was obvious all along that this was predominantly, if not exclusively, unofficial conduct that was used to commit this criminal conspiracy. Now, years later, we are now presented with a legal brief that explains in exceptionally detailed factual ways how that plot was executed using only private conduct. And so what's happened here is we see, in a way, the irrelevancy of the appeal to the Supreme Court. We went to the Supreme Court. It delayed the case for almost a year just to show us what we already knew, which is that this conduct is not immune because it's not presidential conduct.
Thanks to both of you. I appreciate your analysis and your insight on this. Jennifer Rubin is an opinion writer at The Washington Post, the author of Resistance, How Women Saved Democracy from Donald Trump. Matt Seligman is a fellow at Stanford Law's Constitutional Law Center, co-author of How to Steal a Presidential Election.